Hi, I'm responding to Blake Logan's live stream last night. I was on there with him and some others. It was entitled, um, what was it? He had a funny name for it. The Vegan Godfather stream. And there were a few topics that we kind of went. I mean, some of these topics deserved more time, and others we tried to fit so much. I think we fit a lot of information in a short period and probably didn't do the topics justice. But anyway, I wanted to go through and just provide those references that I said I would and elaborate on a couple points, tie up some loose ends. Now, I've made a comment in that video of the live stream, and I put a lot of this in there, but I'm pulling up here in front of me or above me some of the images that people might not pull up or even access from the comments that I left. Even though I left these references, I think to all these, I might have one or two more in here, but I'm just going to run through them real quickly and kind of summarize here because there was a lot of unturned boulders, I think. So in this image that we're looking at here, I didn't mention this directly in the live stream except in the comments of the live stream. I posted this site for this study, this and another. Well, it's an experiment, and what we're looking at is brain images, fMRI brain images. So we're looking at blood activity, bold, which stands for blood level, oxygen dependent, something or another. Blood, I don't know. Well, blood oxygen level dynamics. So hemodynamics. Okay, so blood activity. Where you see the coloration, that's where you see more blood activity. So just like you'd have more, if you have more muscle activity, you're going to have more blood flow there. Same thing with neural activity. So it starts with a spark of electricity in the neurons, if you want to think of it that way, and then you get blood activity afterwards. But it happens quickly, and it's a good correlate of the activity that is associated with structures that have specific functions. Although the brain is very complex. If you think about it, there's 86 billion on the average neurons in the central nervous system anyway. Most of those are in the brain, of course. But from the actual distance from one neuron to another is not more than 3 degrees separation between them. So that's a lot of interconnectivity. If you're going to reach any given neuron with no more than 3 different interconnections. Why am I saying this? Well, you can kind of appreciate how complex it is, and I'm not throwing these images up here to really exploit the topic because it deserves a lot more time, or to pretend that I know everything about these or even a lot of what's going on in these studies. I mean, there's still a lot of questions to be answered, so this is not anything that's really clear proof, but what I like about it is it is hard data, even though we may not fully understand what all it's entailing. What we're looking at is activity highlighted in red, more activity that is, where you see gray is less activity, and then where you see yellow is actually more activity than the red. And if you look at the omnivores on the left, and I know this is kind of an oversimplification, but based on what the authors of the study were saying, it's showing more activity in the vegan's brain compared to the omnivores, and images are being presented in this experiment in which animals are suffering or humans are suffering, and that's why you have it divided up here, and you see that pretty much those areas that light up when humans are viewing other humans that are in distress and empathizing with them, because we're looking at areas that are associated with the empathy network. Pretty much same areas roughly as the areas that are activated when animals are being viewed as under distress. Except you see a lot more activity, indicating a lot more empathy among the vegans than the omnivores. And the particular sites, there's one in the vegan site, the Wernicke's area. It's in the left temporal lobe here towards the back, and that's associated with the efforts to understand communication. and so you're seeing more activity there in the vegans, significantly more than the omnivores. But anyway, that's that. You can look at that. I typed up some details about it in the comments in Logan Blake's video. This is a pretty interesting study if you're at all interested in empathy or vegan diets, or I mean, I don't know how you can not be interested in this kind of a thing. Think about all the activity that can occur in the brain, and the difference between a resting state and the brain's while it's on task is on average roughly estimates about only about 5% difference in activity, because even the resting brain is active. So, but you see the highlighted areas where you're seeing more activity here on the average. So Felipe, as well as others, did a follow-up study, and in this study you see more brain images a few years later, and they recap that kind of what I summarized there, but there's some more details. They emphasized also that the closer phylogenetically in relatedness to humans that the animals were, that the human subjects were viewing in that experiment, the more empathy areas associated with empathy were activated. So, monkeys as opposed to pigs, and humans as opposed to monkeys across the board. Humans or vegans, vegetarians, and omnivores showed more activity when viewing the humans under distress than the animals that were in distress. It's just that the vegans and vegetarians showed more overall activity with both vegans or both animals and humans when they're under distress, indicating more empathy. Anyway, they summarized that, and then just I mentioned the Wernicke's area that was highlighted there. That's what that study says, and more. I mean, there's much more in these studies to look at. What am I looking here? Right. In this one, educating children to display or have more pro-social behavior, including empathy. One way that they're going about it in this study is by proposing and then assessing the interactions between animals, and then the likelihood that children will then display more empathy towards other children, and there's associations there, as well as, of course, what pretty much anybody already knows is that when there's violence towards animals, that those children end up showing violence towards people when they get older too. There's that and more here in this study. Some of it might be common sense, but I typed in a couple of messages related to empathy, and I was surprised that some people were kind of wondering, well, do you really have proof of that, or are you just making this up? And I thought it was common sense stuff, like people that have empathized more with animals have more capacity to empathize towards people, and vice versa. People who abuse animals are more likely to abuse people. People who consume meat are less likely to empathize. And it wasn't just it's been consistent. So anyway, that's that. Moving right along. Empirical evidence supports the contribution of empathy to parenting. So this goes into studies that looked at the effects of various psychological disorders. We touched on this, and I didn't know where to start. I mean, I mentioned depression, and I think I might have mentioned PTSD and some other things, whereby those psychological or psychopathologies, pretty much any one that I found research on, that there's this association with less empathy associated when people had depression, when they had anxiety, pretty much across the board. Any psychopathology that I saw any research about on the topic, those subjects also demonstrated less empathy when it was being tested. And then the effect that they had on the children. The children were more likely to have ADHD, to have bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder. It's all in here and more. There's a couple studies on that. I think this might be the next one I'm pulling up now. Um, I'm pulling up now. Yeah. Okay. And then this is just to show, actually, this one, reading the mind in the eyes is a popular test to see what empathy levels the subjects have. And basically, they're presented with pictures of people's, mainly just their eyes and not much else in facial features, but they try to guess what mood the images are portraying. Um, yeah, and that's one test for empathy too. There's other subjective tests too that are being used, questionnaires in these studies. So it's not just the hard data, but the subjective data is being looked at as well. Just more bits about empathy traditionally being considered to be a uniquely human trait, but that it probably, based on the evidence, it seems as though that empathy um, has been going on even before humans have been around, and in some form. And then also these other studies are showing that rats are showing empathy towards other rats that are trapped. Here it is, pro-social behavior in rats, modulated by social experience. So it is biological in that the rats are showing empathy towards other rats without any reward. Another bit of evidence that empathy is biological is that, and I've heard this from more than one source, babies, newborns up to 3 days old, they when they hear other babies cry, then they start crying just reflexively, and so there's some of the early stages of empathy at play there. So in this study on rats, like I said, the rats without reward are helping other rats that are trapped in some blocked off, areas of I don't know if they're Skinner boxes or in cages basically, and the rats are whether they're unrelated or not, or if they're socially affiliated first, even though if they're a different strain, then they'll help the rat when they see they're under distress. They'll press a bar to allow the rat to come out, even if they're not socially interacting with that rat, or if they didn't know him before. So basically, if rats can empathize across subspecies, then humans surely have that capacity. And what's being looked at here, what's being emphasized, is the fact that these rats, they're showing more, it takes more empathy to help another in need of distress if there's no relationship to them. And so that was another topic we touched on that I didn't emphasize enough. Okay, so it's showing more capacity for empathy if you're getting less out of it, if you're less affiliated with that person or with that animal, and yet there's still that urge to help, to have that empathic concern or experience that empathic distress when you're helping conspecifics or other species. So it's quite common to help people within one's family, within one's extended family, within one's nationality, but to go beyond that and help strangers, as the rats did, or other species, shows higher levels of empathy. Just waiting for it to load here. And what am I looking at? Oh yeah, here we're looking at, so I mentioned all the comorbidities with empathy, or you could say they're symptoms, which they probably are. They are, with PTSD, depression, and ADHD, etc. Also, just like other mood disorders too. I mean, they weren't always. Well, here we have 4 different conditions. This is independent of other psychological conditions. So, different types of empathy deficits that are recognized here. It's slow loading up here. Just got a couple more slides to look at here. Oh yeah, and this one, Magnus brought up a topic about then people will wonder, what are they actually getting out of empathy, and if they're going to feel pain so readily. And so Magnus brought up a question about, well, are there advantages to not having empathy? And he didn't. This might have been on his mind, I suspect, some sort of example like this. We didn't go into it, but here we're looking at the case of medical professionals, like a physician that might need to keep composed when busy at work, and not get overly involved or emotionally, how should I say, enmeshed, or too involved in the patients that he's treating, so that he can maintain objectivity and composure as he's productive and effective in what he's doing. Some of that is effective, but that's kind of the traditional view. Now, what's being looked at here is, it has been for a while actually, is the fact that these health practitioners are more prone to getting burned out if they're not expressing some empathy. And so actually empathy is an ideal balance between emotional over-involvement and total detachment. Total detachment is dissociation. When you totally detach and you avoid empathizing, you underemphasize it, you're not doing yourself a favor. It's self-destructive when you detach. When you withhold empathy, when you empathize, there's benefits psychologically for the person that's empathizing. So there's some ups and downs, but the overall feeling of connectedness to individuals across species, that provides belonging, purpose, kind of a spiritual kind of a feeling, meaningfulness in life, and that really transcends any kind of temporary distress one might feel when empathizing with another one that's suffering or in pain, whether it's a human or an animal. Besides that, and there's studies showing that those who more readily empathize also get to feel the good feelings that others feel too. But too much of that, not having some understanding of the boundaries and being able to detach readily, is bad, or I should say unhealthy. And but in general, empathy is being underemphasized. And I mentioned in the comment section of Blake's channel also that well, I lost my chain of thought. It was early on. I mentioned it's something to do with another benefit of empathy. I'll think of it later. But anyway, let me just go through this. I know there's a few things here, and if we get into dissociating here, Kunst and Hull did this study here in which they're looking at dissociation. So again, think of dissociation as the opposite of empathy. Dissociation is symptomatic. Empathy is healthy. Empathy is a major dimension that's tested in emotional IQ tests, which are already underemphasized. And that's what I was going to say, is that the researchers, and I mentioned this in that comment section, that the researchers noted that empathy with animals is underemphasized in Westerners. There was some question about that, and that because we got on the topic about, is it going to benefit you when there's social factors in play to promote empathy. So that can happen, but on the whole, empathy tends to be underemphasized among Westerners, and even though humans have this great untapped capacity to empathize more. So here we're talking about dissociation, and when people who are consuming meat particularly, they dissociate more from consuming their food. Look, this takes psychic energy. Like I say, dissociation, you're not doing yourself any favors. When you dissociate long term, you structuralize stress. You're not as expressive. You're inhibited emotionally. You think about all the evolutionary advantages that have occurred because humans have empathized with others, been connected with others. It's such an integral process for security, for bonding, for togetherness, etc., for communication, and just inversely related to virtually any psychopathology that I could find any information on. So yeah, so they're distancing themselves from the meat diet and the actual killing by processing the meat more. They're able to withdraw more. They're able to dissociate more. Is that a good thing? In moderation, yes, at times, but not over the long term. So when dissociation occurs chronically, then you're talking about states of dissociation that long term turn into traits of dissociation where the stress is structuralized, and you go through those behaviors of dissociating long term, and it's downright self-destructive no matter how you look at it. In the long run, it is. And yeah, that's it. This is just mine. That was something else. So anyway, leave the comments below, and thanks for watching, and check out Blake's channel as well.